It's Friday, everyone. What do we do on Fridays here at the Hint Hive? That's right, we smash the patriarchy. Hey there, Hive members. Welcome back to the Hint Hive, Amplifying Women's Voices. I'm your host, Kelly Hint, your queen bee, psychotherapist, feminist life coach, feminist rage processor, emotional support hype woman, and fellow human trying to survive whatever fresh chaos society decided to manufacture this week. Today's episode is one that might challenge some people, might stretch some people, might validate some people, and maybe even annoy a few people, which, honestly, means we're probably talking about something important. Because today's topic is how the patriarchy affects men. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And whew, this is a layered conversation. Now, before someone hears the word patriarchy and immediately starts hyperventilating into a protein shake while typing "not all men" in all caps, let me clarify something. Talking about systemic gender dynamics is not the same thing as attacking individual men. And talking about how patriarchy harms men does not erase the very real oppression, violence, inequality, and discrimination that women have historically faced and continue to face. We can hold multiple truths at once. That's called emotional maturity. The patriarchy was built to prioritize male dominance, authority, and control, especially benefiting wealthy, heterosexual, cisgender men. But systems are complicated. And while patriarchy gives certain men power and privilege, it also damages men emotionally, psychologically, relationally, socially, and even physically. And if we actually care about healing society instead of just screaming at each other online, we have to be willing to understand the full picture. Because feminism was never supposed to be about revenge. It was supposed to be about liberation. Liberation from rigid gender roles. Liberation from domination. Liberation from emotional suppression. Liberation from inequality. Liberation from shame. For everybody. So in today's episode, we're diving into what patriarchy actually is, the ways it benefits men, the ways it harms men emotionally, why toxic masculinity hurts everyone, how patriarchy impacts relationships and mental health, why so many men struggle with emotional intimacy, the loneliness epidemic among men, why women and men are being pushed into division, how we can empower each other instead of tearing each other apart, and what healing actually looks like moving forward. This is going to be honest. It is going to be nuanced. It is going to be compassionate. And yes, it's still going to be badass, because that's who we are here in the Hint Hive. So grab your coffee, your iced latte, your emotional support Stanley Cup, your therapy journal, or your feminist battle armor, and let's get into it. Okay, first things first. Let's define what patriarchy actually means, because social media has completely butchered this conversation. Surprise, surprise. Some people hear patriarchy and think feminists are blaming every man alive for every societal problem since the invention of indoor plumbing. That's not what this means. Patriarchy is a social system where men as a group historically hold more institutional power, authority, privilege, and control than women. This shows up in politics, religion, business leadership, wealth distribution, media representation, law and policies, family structures, social expectations, workplace culture, and gender norms. Historically, men had greater access to education, property ownership, financial independence, political participation, voting rights, career opportunities, legal authority, and bodily autonomy. Women, meanwhile, were often expected to caretake, serve, obey, sacrifice, stay silent, shrink themselves, and depend financially on men. And while society has absolutely evolved, remnants of patriarchal thinking are still deeply embedded into modern culture. Now, here's where the conversation becomes a little bit more complicated. Patriarchy doesn't simply tell women, you are less powerful. It also tells men, you must earn your humanity through performance. And that is where a lot of men become trapped. Patriarchy rewards certain kinds of masculinity. Usually, masculinity that is stoic, dominant, emotionally restrained, hyper-independent, competitive, aggressive, financially successful, physically strong, sexually assertive, and unshakable. So yes, patriarchy gives men advantages in many ways, but it also creates an impossible psychological standard that many men spend their entire lives trying to live up to. And as a psychotherapist, let me tell you, the emotional suffering underneath that pressure is very real. The loneliness is real. The shame is real. The fear is real. The emotional disconnection is real. And a lot of men were never given the tools to even talk about it. Okay, first up, the good. Let's start with honesty. There are ways patriarchy benefits men. And when I say the good, I mean the good part of patriarchy for men, not the good part of it for us. So, like I said, patriarchy does benefit men. Pretending otherwise does not help anybody. And one thing feminism needs more of is nuance. Because if we ignore the reality of privilege, we lose credibility. Statistically, men still dominate positions of power globally. Men hold the majority of political leadership roles, Fortune 500 CEO roles, executive leadership jobs, government positions, wealth ownership, high-paying industries, and tech leadership roles, while women still experience wage gaps, higher caregiving burdens, gender-based violence, underrepresentation in leadership, workplace discrimination, beauty standards that affect employment and social value, and greater unpaid domestic labor. These are measurable realities. Research also consistently shows that men are more likely to be perceived as authoritative or competent in leadership settings. Meanwhile, women displaying the exact same assertiveness are often labeled aggressive, bossy, emotional, difficult, intimidating. And honestly, women are exhausted from walking that tightrope. Patriarchy also often protects men socially in ways people don't always notice. For example, men are interrupted less in professional and personal environments. This is one that drives me crazy because I do not like being interrupted. Men are also less likely to be scrutinized for aging. Men are often given more social permission to prioritize career over caregiving. Men are less likely to be judged for remaining single later in life. Men historically had more legal and financial autonomy. Now again, this does not mean that all men live easy lives. Let me be very, very clear about that. Race, class, disability, sexuality, trauma, mental health, and other factors deeply impact people's experiences. A poor man and a wealthy man do not experience society the same way. A black man and a white man do not experience society the same way. A queer man and a heterosexual man do not experience society in the same way. Intersectionality matters. But overall, patriarchal systems still tend to privilege masculinity over femininity. And the exact same system that gives men certain advantages also creates devastating emotional consequences. Because patriarchy rewards power, but often punishes emotional humanity. And that's where things get messy. Moving on to the bad, how patriarchy damages men emotionally. One of the first things many boys learn is this: don't cry. Man up. Stop being soft. Be tough. Handle it. Boys don't act like that. Research in developmental psychology shows that boys are often discouraged from expressing vulnerable emotions more than girls. And over time, boys start learning which emotions are socially acceptable. Sadness becomes weakness. Fear becomes shame. Tenderness becomes embarrassing. Sensitivity becomes something to hide. And eventually, many men only feel emotionally allowed to express anger, irritation, aggression, humor, and sexuality. That's it. And let me tell you something as a therapist. When human beings are emotionally disconnected from themselves, they struggle relationally. Because you cannot communicate emotions that you were never taught how to identify. So now we have generations of men walking around emotionally overwhelmed, but emotionally illiterate. Many men genuinely struggle to identify what they're feeling because they were never socialized to build emotional vocabulary. And society acts shocked when relationships suffer. From a mental health perspective, this is huge. Men are statistically less likely to seek therapy, less likely to discuss emotional struggles, less likely to ask for help, and more likely to isolate when struggling. Men are also more likely to die by suicide in many countries, including here in the United States. That matters. Because emotional suppression does not eliminate emotional pain. It buries it. And buried pain comes out sideways, sometimes as addiction, rage, emotional withdrawal, avoidance, violence, workaholism, chronic numbness, risk-taking behavior, depression masked as irritability, relationship dysfunction, and emotional shutdown. A lot of men were taught survival, but not emotional processing. And there is a difference. I think many women can relate to the frustration of wanting emotional intimacy with men who were never taught how to emotionally connect, especially women in my generation. It is incredibly frustrating, especially when you see the good in your male partner, in your male family members. But there's a struggle to connect emotionally. But I also think many men are silently suffering under expectations that they never consciously agreed to. And if we don't acknowledge that suffering, we can't heal it. We also need to talk about loneliness, because there is increasing research and conversation around what many experts are calling a loneliness epidemic among men. And honestly, I think patriarchy plays a massive role. Women are often socialized towards emotional intimacy. Women tend to build friendships around emotional support, vulnerability, processing feelings, relational connection, and communication. Men, however, are often socialized towards activity-based bonding. So men may have friends they watch sports with, play games with, work with, drink with, joke with, but not necessarily friends that they deeply emotionally confide in. And then adulthood happens. Marriage stress happens. Career disappointment happens. Divorce happens. Loss happens. Aging happens. Mental health struggles happen. And suddenly, many men realize that they do not actually have strong emotional support systems. That is heartbreaking. Human beings, regardless of gender, are wired for connection. We are not meant to emotionally isolate ourselves. But patriarchy often teaches men that needing support makes them weak, which is devastating. Because vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is part of being human. All right, and now, the ugly. Okay, let's talk about the phrase that makes people combust on the internet. Toxic masculinity. First of all, toxic masculinity does not mean that masculinity in itself is toxic. Healthy masculinity absolutely exists. My husband is a very masculine man in mostly healthy ways. He has had to work, again, being among my generation, he's had to unlearn a lot of patriarchal conditioning and learn how to manage anger because anger was the most acceptable expression of emotion for him. But I can tell you, he has done a fabulous job, and I'm very attracted to his level of masculinity. And guess what? There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make me a bad feminist because I'm attracted to his masculine qualities. Healthy masculinity includes protectiveness, leadership, courage, integrity, responsibility, emotional steadiness, confidence, accountability, and compassion. The problem is when masculinity becomes rooted in domination, emotional repression, entitlement, aggression, power over others, misogyny, emotional detachment, or fear of vulnerability. That is toxic masculinity. Examples include believing men should never cry, mocking emotional vulnerability, equating empathy with weakness, feeling entitled to women's bodies or attention, using aggression to establish dominance, shaming men who appear feminine, treating emotional intimacy as weakness, equating self-worth entirely with money or status. And honestly, a lot of men are exhausted. There's just a theme here, isn't there? Patriarchy is exhausting both men and women. Because patriarchy constantly tells men that they must prove their worth. They must prove they're successful enough, strong enough, stoic enough, rich enough, sexual enough, powerful enough, dominant enough. And when men inevitably fail to meet impossible standards, shame enters the picture. And shame is psychologically corrosive. Unprocessed shame often turns into anger, defensiveness, withdrawal, emotional shutdown, control issues, fragile ego responses, and aggression. This is also why some men react defensively to feminism. Because patriarchy taught them that their worth is tied to power. So equality feels threatening instead of liberating. But equality is not oppression. Women having more rights does not mean men have fewer rights. Women taking up space does not erase men. An emotionally healthy masculinity does not disappear when women become empowered. Actually, healthy masculinity becomes stronger. Now let's talk relationships because, phew, patriarchy absolutely shows up there. A lot of heterosexual relationships are still shaped by outdated gender expectations. Women are often expected to manage emotional labor, remember birthdays, coordinate schedules, maintain social connections, caretake emotionally, anticipate needs, and nurture everybody else. Meanwhile, men are often socialized to define contribution primarily through financial provision, problem solving, and physical labor. And while financial contribution matters, emotional labor matters too. A lot. Many women feel emotionally exhausted because they are carrying invisible emotional responsibilities inside relationships. And many men feel confused because they were never taught emotional partnership skills. Again, this does not excuse harmful behavior, but understanding the conditioning helps explain the disconnect. Patriarchy hurts intimacy because intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability requires emotional safety, which patriarchy often discourages. Real intimacy requires emotional honesty, accountability, communication, empathy, mutual respect, self-awareness, not dominance, not control, not emotional avoidance. Okay, let's talk about how patriarchy harms women and men differently. Now, I want to be extremely clear. The harm is not identical. Women disproportionately experience sexual violence, harassment, reproductive oppression, economic inequality, objectification, safety concerns, unequal domestic labor, body policing, and systemic sexism. Men, however, often experience harm through emotional restriction, pressure to conform, shame around vulnerability, social isolation, and performance-based self-worth. Patriarchy tends to control women externally, and it often controls men internally. And both forms of control are harmful. That's why feminism matters. Because feminism is not just about helping women succeed professionally. It is about dismantling harmful systems and rigid gender expectations altogether. It's about creating a world where people are valued for their humanity, not for how perfectly they perform gender. Now let's address the giant screaming dumpster fire happening online. The internet loves gender wars. Everything becomes men are trash, women are manipulative, masculinity is dead, feminism ruins society. Everybody's angry, everybody's defensive, everybody's projecting, and algorithms love outrage because outrage keeps people scrolling. But in real life, most people want connection. Most people want respect. Most people want safety. Most people want healthy love. Most people want emotional intimacy. Most people want partnership. And we are not going to build healthier communities by dehumanizing each other. Women and men can absolutely empower each other. Healthy masculinity and empowered femininity are not enemies. In fact, emotionally healthy men are some of feminism's greatest allies. And emotionally healthy women help create spaces where emotional honesty becomes possible. Mutual empowerment looks like men supporting women's leadership, women encouraging emotional vulnerability in men, Fathers teaching sons emotional intelligence. Mothers teaching daughters self-worth. Partners communicating openly. Rejecting harmful stereotypes. Holding people accountable without dehumanizing them. Building relationships rooted in partnership instead of domination. Because patriarchy teaches power struggles, healing teaches collaboration. And honestly, we need more collaboration. And let's talk about how we raise better humans. If we want future generations to be healthier, we have to stop trapping children inside rigid gender boxes. Little boys deserve emotional expression, affection, gentleness, creativity, vulnerability, emotional safety, permission to cry, and permission to ask for help. Little girls deserve confidence, leadership opportunities, bodily autonomy, ambition, assertiveness, freedom from objectification, permission to take up space, and permission to prioritize themselves. And all children deserve to know that their worth is not dependent on performing outdated gender expectations. Can you imagine how much healthier society would be if boys learned emotional regulation instead of emotional suppression? If girls learned self-trust instead of people-pleasing? If men weren't ashamed of needing support? If women weren't punished for ambition? If vulnerability was normalized? If compassion was respected? That is the vision. Not domination. Liberation. Now, before we discuss healing the divide, I also want to say something important. Understanding how patriarchy harms men does not require women to tolerate abuse, misogyny, emotional immaturity, manipulation, weaponized incompetence, violence, or sexism. Compassion and accountability can coexist. We can empathize with male pain while still demanding responsibility. Trauma is not an excuse for harming others, and women are not rehabilitation centers for emotionally unavailable men. But healing becomes possible when people are willing to self-reflect. When men unpack harmful conditioning. When women reject internalized misogyny. When people stop seeing vulnerability as weakness. When equality stops being viewed as a threat. And honestly, a lot of men want this healing. Many are exhausted from performing emotional armor all the time. Many want deeper relationships. Many want emotional connection. Many want permission to be fully human. And feminism, real feminism, creates space for that humanity. All right, Hive, let's make this practical. Let's talk actionable steps for both women and men, because awareness without action changes nothing. So for men, practice identifying emotions beyond fine, stressed, or angry. Learn emotional vocabulary. Go to therapy if accessible. Build emotionally honest friendships. Stop equating vulnerability with weakness. Challenge misogynistic behavior among other men. Learn emotional regulation skills. Understand that asking for help is strength. Unlearn the idea that your worth is tied only to productivity. Allow yourself softness without shame. And for women, encourage emotional openness without shaming vulnerability. Continue setting strong boundaries. Reject internalized misogyny. Support emotionally healthy masculinity. Stop romanticizing emotionally unavailable partners. Teach boys emotional literacy. Teach girls that they do not need to shrink themselves. Stop rewarding toxic behavior with attention. And for everyone, listen more. Generalize less. Stay curious. Have uncomfortable conversations. Stop reducing people to internet stereotypes. Build relationships rooted in mutual respect. Normalize emotional honesty. Learn conflict resolution. Practice accountability. Choose connection over domination. Because division isolates people. Connection helps people heal. Let's all do our part. All right, Hive, it is time for your badass affirmation of the week. Say it loud enough for the patriarchy to hear you. I refuse to shrink myself or harden my heart to survive broken systems. I choose growth, emotional courage, compassion, and connection over fear, shame, and division. Yeah, that one deserves a dramatic hair flip. Because here's the truth. Patriarchy teaches disconnection. Disconnection from emotions. Disconnection from vulnerability. Disconnection from compassion. Disconnection from each other. But healing requires courage. Real strength is not domination. Real strength is self-awareness. It's accountability. It's emotional honesty. It's being brave enough to unlearn harmful conditioning. It's choosing empathy when defensiveness would be easier. It's choosing growth when ego wants control. And every single time you choose compassion over cruelty, connection over division, or emotional honesty over emotional armor, you are helping create a healthier world. That matters. You matter. And your willingness to grow matters. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. Feminism is not about replacing one hierarchy with another. It's not about women becoming oppressors. It's not about punishing men for simply existing. It's about freedom. Freedom for women to take up space. Freedom for men to feel. Freedom for people to exist outside rigid gender expectations. Freedom to build relationships based on equality instead of control. Freedom to be emotionally whole human beings. And honestly, the more emotionally healthy people we have in this world, the healthier this world becomes for everybody. Healing gender division does not mean ignoring injustice. It means confronting harmful systems without losing our humanity in the process. It means refusing to become cruel in response to cruelty. It means recognizing that emotional healing is revolutionary. And that work starts with all of us. Every difficult conversation, every difficult moment, every boundary, every act of accountability, every moment of empathy. That is how change happens. Slowly, collectively, humanly. All right, my friends, if this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. A friend, a partner, a brother, a father, a coworker, or honestly anybody trapped in the exhausting online gender war spiral. And if you loved today's episode, make sure you subscribe to the Hint Hive Amplifying Women's Voices on your favorite podcast platform. Leave a review because it genuinely helps more people discover the Hive and join these conversations. And come hang out with us in our online community over on Facebook, where we can keep talking about mental health, feminism, emotional healing, boundaries, relationships, empowerment, trauma recovery, emotional intelligence, and all the messy, complicated, beautiful parts of being human. And of course, if you're having a hard time navigating through life's challenges, let's work together to get you living your best life. Reach out. My contact info is all over the place in the show notes. And until next time, remember, you do not need to become harder to become stronger. You do not need to dominate to deserve respect. You do not need to suppress your humanity in order to be worthy. And healing yourself in a broken system is one of the most radical things that you can do. So do it.